Hi everyone, and thank you very much for watching or listening. Liam Hartree here today with another episode of Presenting Champions for the Simply Inspired podcast. And today I'm truly honored and truly blessed to welcome Mark Pinnock to the show. An incredible man, an incredible human being, motivational speaker, successful businessman, long distance runner who's completed over 30 marathons and ultra marathons. And of course, the third person in history to reach the 7 summits on his first attempt, the 7 highest mountains on each of the 7 continents. Now, today we'll be talking not only about Mark's incredible achievements, which I must say, as an interviewer, it was a challenge to condense effectively several lifetimes in one into, roughly an hour's talk. But we'll also be going deeper into the mindset that it takes to push beyond what most people consider possible in life. So, Mark, thank you very much for your time, and I can barely put into words what a pleasure this is to talk with you. So, thank you.
And thank you for taking the time.
It's a pleasure. And as I mentioned, there'll be some great material here to give back to people. Also, I'll give a quick shout out to Paul Hills as well, famous bare knuckle boxer Paul Hills, who actually introduced us. So thank you, Paul. Shout out to you. Anyway, so Mark, getting into it, as I mentioned, your life is exceptional. You've pushed beyond the limits of what many people consider possible. But before we get to the mountaineering achievements, I'd like to start with some of your long distance running and your marathon and ultra marathon achievements, starting with the initial inspiration to actually do those. So if we go back in time to that point, what was your initial inspiration to begin running to that level, please?
Um, I was a late starter, Liam. I didn't actually, apart from the usual youngster stuff, playing football and mucking around, I didn't really get into anything until my early 40s. And I used to train and teach karate with a few guys. And one of the guys, David Wilson, who's a very good friend of mine, decided one day that he wanted to run the London Marathon in 2003 and was looking for guys to run with him, to train with him. And I quite like the idea of it. I'd never run a marathon. I could run, but I'd never really run more than a few miles around a local village. So David was that inspiration. He said to me, "Let's do it." We signed up for Whiz Kids, which is a children's charity about mobility. So it all quite resonated, and we started training together for probably about 8 or 9 months before the marathon. And I found running quite natural. It wasn't easy, but if I could settle into a pace, then I didn't get too stressed about it and could just keep going. So yeah, that was my first inspiration was a guy, David Wilson, who still teaches karate now, well into his 60s, and still a very good friend of mine. So, and that was the first one. That was it. And from then on, I just kept running. Really, I liked the endorphins that it gave after an 8-10 mile run, training run. I think in 2004, some other guys said they wanted to do the Athens Marathon, which is the original. You start in Marathon and finish in the Colosseum in Athens, which was, yeah, it was really good, really cool. There was 4 of us that did it, and we all really enjoyed it, and it was great fun. And then I think it was just after that, someone said to me, "Look, you're raising money for charity. Let's try and do something a little bit different." So we came up with 666 miles of events over a 1-year period. We called it a devil of a challenge, obviously, 666. And we put together local half marathons, some global marathons, some ultra marathons. And the icing on the cake was to be finishing in the Sahara Desert in a year later in 2006 with the Marathon des Sables, which anyone who's ever done any kind of running would have heard of. It's a self-sufficient 6-day, 250-kilometer run, walk, crawl across the Sahara Desert in extreme temperatures, and you're carrying all of your kit, your sleeping bag, your food, everything in a rucksack. Trying to orienteer by a map. So that was the challenge, and that's what started me on that incredible 30-odd marathon journey. And in that time, I went to New York, Paris, Florence, Edinburgh. I did 100 miles across the Pennines non-stop. I did an event called the Marathon of Britain, which started in the Malvern Hills and was 175 miles, and finishing in Nottingham 5.5 days later, all orienteering. So all of these events accumulated to roughly, and we never checked it to the inch, to 666 miles of events in a year. And we raised about £12,000 for various charities, and two that are close to my heart is children's charities and cancer charities. So we split that between the two, and we had a celebratory event in a club near where I lived in Brentwood at the time, with some karate mates. Well, lots of mates. There was lots of people there, and lots of people that had sponsored me. So it was that was the reason that I started running, and so that was the catalyst to then go on to other things.
Wow, absolutely exceptional. I mean, this is the thing, Mark. When I was preparing for this, I was looking at your running achievements, and I was thinking, well, we could do a whole interview just about that. And I was thinking, how do I condense this down? So it's absolutely remarkable, and the meaning behind it as well. Absolutely wonderful with the fundraising. And with regards to the amount of marathons that you've run, out of all of those, out of the remarkable places that you've been through that process as well, do you have personal favorites when you look back on them now, in terms of that was my favorite race, or is it for you more the journey as a whole that matters?
I think it's two parts. An individual marathon is quite lonely. It's quite isolated. You start with wherever you are, Paris, New York, and I never travel with anybody that I knew that to start the run with. So you chat with people, but it's always about running and what times you think you're going to do. But then you just go for 26.2 miles and do your best to get to the end. But I think once I got into the ultra running, where there's a lot more distance on a daily basis, you tend to buddy up with someone of a similar speed. If you're not, orienteering is not too great, then you try and look for someone who's better at orienteering than you are, and you try and work as a team. And that for me, I really enjoyed, and I got to meet some real exceptional people that were doing the journey for reasons similar to mine, really, either coming out of addiction, or for charity, or for just finding a purpose in life that made them. And a lot of these guys were in their 40s and 50s, and ladies too. It was almost as if they'd got to a lot of us had got to a stage in our lives that thought, what's next? What do we do now? How can we I had family early. I had 4 sons. By the time I was 26, I had 4 kids. So I'd already done that bit. By the time I was started on this journey, they'd grown up. And there was a lot of people like that had got to a stage in life of thinking, well, is that it? And I've worked so far. I've been married. I've got kids. It's all very nice, all very lovely, but I need something to make me get out of bed. I don't want to go gardening. I don't want an allotment. I wanted something a bit more exciting. So that camaraderie, and I got to know some guys that were ex-special forces, some real guys, top guys in certain businesses, and just people that wanted to achieve something. And it was always that goal to get to the end of the day, to get to the campsite, to get to the tent, sit around the fire, or have some food and just chat about the day's calamities. And often people got lost, or it was it was that really inspired me to continue doing stuff, the meeting really interesting people.
Absolutely. I love that, because as you said at the beginning, Marathons, long distance running, ultra running, it is seen as being quite a lonely sport. So the fact that you mentioned the connections and flip that on its head, I like that a great deal. And before we move on into the mountaineering side of things, I'd also like to touch on your preparation for these races. Now, that can be mental and physical preparation, but in terms of giving an insight into the training and into to some extent, the aspect that people don't see from the outside looking in, which they see the race being the tip of the iceberg, but all the work that goes in behind the scenes is quite extensive, especially from the point of view that you were consistently pushing the limits and pushing past the limits. By that, I mean going from regular marathons, which are a feat in themselves, to obviously the ultras. So I don't mind which direction we take with this, but just to get a little insight into your training methods would be very cool, please.
I think early on it was just keeping fit. I used to train karate 3 or 4 times a week. I fought, even in my 40s, I was still fighting, and that level of fitness, although it's slightly different, it's very short and sharp. Where long distance running is continual. You're still at a level of fitness which is a good starting point. It's not what they do now. What's it, couch to 5K? I mean that would be an extreme to go from couch to marathon or couch to ultra. So I already had that fitness. I already had a determination that I like to achieve things. So and once I got into the continual running, when I started doing the 666 miles, there was no real need to train, because every weekend almost, or once or twice a week, there would be an event. So it was keep fit through the week, keep the nutrition as best you can, keep as healthy, and try and get as much sleep as you can, because come the weekend there's going to be a 4 or 5 hour challenge, and with the ultra even longer. So I think you have to get to a certain level to be able to do it. Mentally, I've just always been someone that, someone said to me, is it because you don't like to fail? I said, no, it's because I like to achieve. And I think there's a difference. I really do. No one wants to fail. No one sets out to fail, but does everyone set out to achieve? Or does everyone think, well, I'll give it a go? I never started a business thinking, well, it might succeed and I might earn some money at it. I never stood at a start line on a marathon or an ultra and think I might get to the end. I knew I probably would never win it. I'm no Mo Farah, that's for sure. But I'd always get to the end. And I think when we move on to the mountains, I remember consciously standing at the bottom and saying, I'm going to the top and I'm coming down. Going to the top is only halfway. So I think if you can have that switch that says I'm doing this, not I might do it, then, and you've interviewed a lot of people, I suspect that may be a fairly common theme. I would suspect it is because guys who can achieve, there is no option. There is no option to getting in the ring or standing on the start line or whatever it's going to be. You're going to succeed, and that's if you don't do that, then you're already committing to failure, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Well, personally, I agree. And answering your question there, it is a common theme that comes up in the sense that really, I think things like this are often described in very simple quotes, but they're the old saying, whether you believe you can, whether you believe you can't, you're right either way. Absolutely true. And the concept of playing to win, not just playing not to lose, not just playing to survive, if you like, and I can get through this. No, I'm actually going to do this with everything I have. Those things do come into it. And that was also part of the reason for asking about the training, because enjoying the process, which is something that comes over as you speak about this, I would also say comes up frequently, in the sense that they're not just focused on the result, but focused on the journey it takes to get to the result, is also a powerful one. So very happy with that, because as I mentioned, a lot of the lessons you've learned through everything you've achieved are applicable to many life areas. They're not just applicable to sports. So my hope being that as people listen to this, they pick up on those little tips and they can apply that to anything, whether it's business, whether it's education, whether it's something else altogether. So that's Absolutely wonderful so far. And on the subject of the mindset, is one other thing I'm curious about, and then we'll have to delve headlong into the mountain side of things. But with running such great distances, obviously there's bound to be quite a pain barrier, no matter how fit a person is, I would imagine. Now, I do run, but I don't run anywhere near these types of distances. But in terms of the concept of mentally overcoming pain and because pain is a perceived limit, that's where I'm coming at this from. How would you mentally sort of push through or push past those forms of barriers as you sort of feeding back to what you just said about I'm going to do this, I'm going to get to the top. But that's well and good when you're starting the race, when you're starting the mountain, but when you're nearing the end and you're probably feeling quite
Yeah.
beaten up by that point, you know where I'm going with this.
I do, because I get asked this a lot. People, yeah, a real injury you can't do anything about. If you break your leg or something like that, that's a real injury. Pain can be managed, and I thought about this a lot during my time, and it is painful. Running 100 miles is painful. Getting up every day and doing a marathon across terrain, and certainly in the desert, is painful. Your body aches. Your body wants to give up. So you've got to make sure that your mind is in control of your body and not the other way around. I suspect a lot of the times when someone who's not that focused, and that's not, not that everyone can be, they'll get an ache and a pain, and they'll go, oh, I can't do this, I ache. You have to then tell yourself you can. It's just an ache. It's just a pain. It's just, you've not broken your leg. It is a cliche, mind over matter, mind over body, and that for me is how I managed it. Yeah, there were times where you certainly on the Marathon of Britain, running across. I mean, Sahara's hot. It's hard. It's hot. It's 50 degrees. But when you're running from the Malvern Hills to Nottingham in September, when it does not stop raining and your feet are soaking wet, and everything is, you get lost in, the trails of England. The footpaths are not, the OS maps are not 100% correct, but believe you me, they might be better now. I haven't done anything for a few years, but the frustration of getting lost, or the aches and pains of damp and wet feet. And I've got pictures after that where I ended up in A&E with the soles of my feet nearly off, but I still strapped them up, completed it. It's mind over matter. It really is. That has to be your focus. Pain is short-lived. Really is short-lived if you can control it.
Absolutely. It's a valuable life lesson for people, because when a lot of people, I mean, other athletes will understand what you're talking about here. For people who are not so into sports, it's very relevant, because people look at people who've achieved things like yourself, and there is a almost a superhuman quality. And the beauty of talking about things like the pain barrier and whatnot is it shows that you're going through exactly the same things anyone else would go through, but it's all about how you choose to handle them, if that makes sense. And
Yeah, I have to use an analogy. When I was fighting and training karate, I trained with an incredible karate sensei, Simon Kidd. He's probably 7th, 8th dan. And when I fought with him, he was in his 3rd, 4th dan. But he was a big guy, but incredibly quick. And I think he broke my nose at least once or twice just in sparring and teaching me to be better. And I often thought, when I was in the desert, or I was like, this is painful. It was never as painful as doing 3 or 4 rounds with Simon Kidd, and I got through that. So I think it has to be put into a relative mindset that you say, well, this is not as painful as something else. So let's just get on with it. Let's get on with it. I'm not sure whether anyone can. It's easy to learn that, or it's just something that you got. And I'm not like that. It doesn't make you any better than anybody else, but there is something along. You talk about later in one of the questions, nature or nurture. there's definitely something along the journey from childhood into adulthood that you either accept that you accept pain and fail, or you don't accept pain and carry on. I believe, and I don't know what that is, but I'm pretty sure it's luck.
Wow, that is a fascinating insight into that topic. Actually, I like that. We'll move into the mountaineering. You've mentioned your karate as well, and funnily enough, I didn't really send any questions about this. I think I may have come across the fact you were training, but in terms of the fact you were competing and everything, um, let's have, if it's okay with you, I'm going off slightly off script here of what I sent you, but in terms of one or two of your highlights from your karate days, because as you mentioned, that is a different type of challenge. It's a different type of fitness. It's a different type of mental and physical challenge. You may know I do a lot with martial arts, combat sports, that type of thing in terms of interviews. So I just would like to briefly pick up on maybe one or two of your highlights from your fighting days before we go headlong into the mountains, if that's okay, please.
I think I had quite a short, really, karate career. I didn't get into karate till in my 30s, probably late 30s, early 40s when I got to black belt and started fighting. So it was more about local events against different clubs. But I think the highlight was when in my mid 40s when a group of us went to the European Masters Games in Malmo in Sweden. So a team from we were originally Ishinru, then became Kaizen Kai. A team of 6 of us went there and fought as the English Ishinru team or Kaizen Kai team. And I think although I lost my first round, that was great to have that again, that camaraderie of 6 guys, all really good athletes, really good karate students, to go there and be part of that was good. And one of the guys, David Wilson, who I spoke about originally, who got me into running 7 or 8 years before this, he actually got a silver in that. And again, another guy, Ian Wilson, and we call him Radar, still a very good friend of mine, in his 50s, late 50s, achieved the silver in the world championship in karate. So these were top guys, and it was a privilege to be part of that. So I think that, although I lost early on, that'll be my highlight, just to be part of it.
Absolutely. Well, it's an amazing achievement being part of it. And again, in terms of the life lessons, something you touched on there, success breeds success, doesn't it, in terms of who you associate with. And again, not saying anyone's better than anyone else, but they do say that we become the sort of the composite, if you like, of the 5 people with whom we spend the most time. And that was something that just came over to me from what you were saying there, is you're surrounding yourself with people who are chasing that dream, chasing that goal, whether they get there or not, but they have the ambition to try. And obviously you're in good company there, and vice versa for them. So it's a very valuable lesson in that regard. So getting into the mountaineering and getting into your remarkable achievements in that world, same thing as the running. Let's start with your initial inspiration. What initially lit the fire inside of you, if you like to say, okay, I want to climb the first mountain. Let's start there, please.
It was almost exactly the same thing. I finished the Marathon des Sables in early 2006. I was having a drink with a few friends in Shenfield and Essex, and one of the guys, Hugh, who had already, he was the guy that asked me to do the Athens Marathon with him. He'd been into the Alps and done a few mountains. I'd never climbed. I hadn't even climbed Snowdon at this point. I hadn't climbed. I grew up in Southend-on-Sea by the Thames and the North Sea. There aren't a lot of mountains round here, that's for sure. But we were having a drink, and Hugh said that he really fancied doing Kilimanjaro, and should we put a team of, I think, guys. I think there was another guy from the karate who'd only just started that came. He had a business partner who was from New Zealand who was going to be over. He wanted to do it. A friend of mine, who's still a good friend of mine, Pete Ryder, and we shared the same accountant. So our our account and decided he wanted to come as well. So a team of 5 or 6 of us, I think it was in the end. That was it. Let's go climb Kilimanjaro, and we decided to make it a bit of a lads 3-week trip. We did a Serengeti tour. We did the 6 of us went to Kilimanjaro. Only 3 of us summited out the 6. And then the next, we were going to go off to Zanzibar for 3 or 4 days in a beachside hotel and get drunk, which I quite like the idea of that bit. So I said, yeah, I'll come. I was fit, top of 45 years old, fit as I could ever be, really, after all of the running. And off we went. And as I said, 3 of us, only 3 of us got to the top. Me, the New Zealand guy, and one of my mates, Pete Ryder. And I just stood on the top, and I thought, I really like to climb Everest. I don't, I just want to climb Everest now. It was not, Kilimanjaro is not easy, and and I know a lot. They've done it for Red Nose Day, and you get a lot of celebrities do it. But if you do it, we did a very short route. We were up in 7 days, or up and down in 7 days, and it was tough. It's not a walk. It is a walk in the park. It's a walk in the Kenya National Park, but it's not a walk in the park if you like. It's pretty tough, So. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the whole journey, and that was it. We came back, and I thought, right, I want to be a mountaineer now. I need to learn how to be a competent, capable, safe mountaineer, and in 5 years' time, I'm going to climb Everest. And that was the start of the journey.
Wow, that is remarkable. In my mind, it does remind me of that old story about Everest when I think the initial first climbers were asked, why do you want to climb? And they basically said, well, because it's there. And in a way, it sounds arbitrary and it sounds sort of a strange answer, but I can understand from a certain perspective where they were coming from. And your answer reminded me getting to the top of one, thinking, right, I have to do Everest. But at that time, you were focusing on Everest. Did you expect to climb the 7 summits at that point? Well, I say 7, the remaining ones at that point, or were you more sort of specifically lasered in on Everest itself?
No, specifically Everest. I contacted a couple of the guys I've been running with. I think I said earlier was special forces. I knew one of them was a guide in the Alps as well. So I remember meeting him at a hotel in London and sat down and said, look, I want to climb Everest. You've done some stuff. He hadn't done Everest, but he'd done some serious mountains. What do I do? And he said, the first thing you got to do is become a competent climber. And he recommended a couple of there's a couple of good groups in England, and I chose one called Jagged Globe, a company out of Sheffield. Contacted them, said, look, this is my end goal in 5 years' time. What do I need to do? And that then started with going to Scotland, learning how to ice climb, learning how to put crampons on, abseil, crevasse rescue. So started to learn the skills that you need to be a safe person and that people want to climb with. I don't want to be someone that people go, he ain't got a clue, this guy. I don't want him anywhere near me. So, and on that journey, that part of that is then to see how you react to altitude. So their first suggestion was in 2007. I went to Argentina, and Pete Ryder, one of the guys that had come to Kilimanjaro, he came with me, so still a good friend, to climb Aconcagua in Argentina, and that's I think it's just over 7,000 meters. So that's a good test, if you like, to see how you can react to altitude. So I think it was a 3 or 4 week trip. You go up and down a few times. I was lucky. It didn't seem to affect me at all, apart from the usual headaches, just feeling quite sickly, but it never really stopped me going up and getting to the summit. So that was then. And in the meantime, I'd sort of sold a couple of businesses. So I was living abroad in the south of France. So I took a year out, although I kept running a lot. I was doing a lot of running between Antibes and Nice and Menton and Monaco, and because it's quite hilly, so I kept fit. And then the second one was McKinley, or Denali as it's often known, in Alaska, which again is, I think it's about 6,500 meters, but it's not the highest, but it's quite a tough one. You know, you've flown in on a little biplane. It's quite self-sufficient. It's quite different. You don't have anyone carrying your stuff. You've got an 80-litre rucksack on your back, and you start to really learn the skills on using the ropes, using the crampons, being roped up to other people. So you get that whole mountaineer closeness, as opposed to big expeditions where there's a lot of support. There certainly isn't any in Alaska. So I summited that one in 2009, and spoke again to Jagged Globe, and they said, right, you've got one more test, and that's Choi Yu, which is, I think it's the 14th highest mountain. It's about 8,200 meters. And off we went, and you climb that one on the north side of the Himalayas. So we went into China, through Tibet, and set off climbing Choi Yu, and that was in 2010. And I wanted to climb Everest in 2011. So we went off. We never got to the summit of that one, so I'm quite glad it's not one of the 7 summits, because there was avalanche. We were up at about 7,000 meters, and the side of the face we had to go up avalanched off, and it was deemed too dangerous that year, so they shut the mounting and no one went up. I was disappointed about that, but although it's disappointing not to summit, my goal at that point was Everest. So came back down, and during this time you're climbing with expert climbers from all over the world, and they report back about you. You know, they say, yeah, he can do this, he can do that, he's pretty good, he's not good, don't let him on a mat, or whatever. So I must have had a good report, because I then said to the guys at Jagged Globe, I want to climb Everest in May 2011, and they said, yeah, you're a good guy, go do it. So I think I was between wives at that time, so I decided to move out to the Alps, and so some friends of mine that lived in a little village called Chatel found me an apartment, and I spent from the November to the May when I went to Everest training. So I was fortunate that I'd sold some business, didn't need to work, so I could climb and ski every day. So it became, really, really the top of my game. And and in March 2011, I set off for the Himalayas, met up with some great guys who are still good friends today. There was one from Belfast and one from Glasgow, so we were known as the Englishmen, Irishmen, and Scotsmen. And off I went in the March. Everest is a bit longer than most trips. We're out there 12 weeks, so that's challenging, being away on the side of a mountain for 12 weeks. But that was 25th of May 2011. I achieved my goal. I stood at the top of Everest along with just 2 other guys and two Sherpas. Only 6 of us on the top. We were right at the end of the season. I'd been up to 8,000 meters before, but I had a throat infection, so I came down. But went up again with ex-Welsh rugby international Richard Parks, an ex-double Olympic gold medal rower Steve Williams, and a friend of mine, Adam. Steve had fallen behind, but he eventually summited. But he summited just after us a few hours. So I was in good company. Apart from having to share a tent with a 6'4" Welsh rugby player, the journey was good. So we became really good friends. So yeah, as far as I was concerned, that was the end of my climbing career. Done what I wanted to do.
Wow. Absolutely exceptional. I mean, there's so many things that we could feed off into there, and I'm resisting that temptation. But one thing I do have to ask: when you did reach the summit, when you are up there, literally at the top of the world, really, for all intents and purposes, how can you put an experience like that into words in terms of anything from the environment itself, but more importantly, how you were personally feeling at that point in time, having done it? I appreciate you still had to make it back down and everything, but at that point, having reached
it's almost impossible to put it into words. When I started doing the motivational speaking, one of the pictures I had, was of Richard Parks sitting on the top with his satellite phone, ringing his mum in Swansea, absolutely crying like a baby because he'd summited the top of Everest. That puts it into perspective. There it is just one massive emotional explosion of, there are so many times as you're climbing that you think, have I bitten off more than I can chew? Can I do this? You're going up sheer faces with 100-mile gusts of wind. Your tent is like flapping all night, and you hear avalanche. There are so many things on that journey that you overcome, that when you actually get to the top, it's just like you cry like a baby. If you don't, then you're a tough guy, because there's something wrong with you if you don't get to the top of the world and not be emotional. So I often I use that picture, and I hope Richard doesn't mind, because it's just incredible. So yeah, the actual base camp to summit is 5 days, although it's the end of a 12-week journey. And we came down in 2 and walked out in another 2. And as we did it, as you always do when you come off a mountain, we partied for a few days. Yeah, that's a given. You have to do that. As when you've achieved something, then you have to let it out. You've got to let it out. That's the key. That's the key. And a lot of sportsmen are exactly the same. When you get to that achievement, world title, WBA, whatever you get to, there's got to be days of just let it all out. Let all that all that you sacrifice to get to that moment. You just got to let it go. So came down. Was living in France. I got asked to do a presentation in a local bar. Did a presentation about Everest and the pictures and stuff. And one of the guys then said to me, "Well, the journey you've been on, you've climbed 4 of the 7 summits. Did you ever think about that?" And I'd heard it mentioned as I went along. In fact, Richard Parks, when he summited, was on a journey. He created a world record. He did them within 7 weeks or whatever. It was incredible. Look, you're a Welshman. You must have heard of Richard. He's an incredible guy. And he mentions me in his book. He sat at the top of Everest with his Essex boy, as he used to call me. So, but he was on that journey at the time. So I'd heard about it. And so I thought, well, I might as well do the other 3 then. It's as simple as that, really. And that was the end of 2011. So in 2012, I did the other 3. Just decided I'm going to do the other 3. So Elbrus, which is the highest in Europe, most people think it's Mont Blanc, but Elbrus is in Georgia and it's higher, 5,600 meters. We skied that with some friends that were all living in Chatel, the village I lived in. 5 English guys and me. We skied that again. Only 3 of us got to the top. That was number 5. I then flew out to Indonesia in the October, I think it was, 2012, and that was a completely different kettle of fish altogether. It's jungle. You're flying on a biplane, land on a dirt track. You've got tribes people trying to steal all your equipment, trying to help you. We trek for a jungle for 2 weeks to get to a rock that's 4,800, same height as Mont Blanc. We were held up by tribesmen with machetes and knives trying to take they wanted dollars and football shirts. And I was only with 2 other guys, an American guy and a Brazilian guy. And the Brazilian guy happened to have a Ronaldo football shirt, so he soon lost that. So we did that. I did that, and then almost directly from Indonesia back to I think I came back to the UK for about a week, and then straight out to the Antarctic to do number 7. And by then the pressure was on, because I'd done all 6 at the first attempt and was thinking, wow, this is incredible. I've only heard of 2 other people that have ever done that, and one of them is Richard Parks, and one of them was a doctor who did it in the I think he did it in early 2000, who lived in not far from where I live now, strangely enough. And the pressure was on, so it was out into the Antarctic. December the 5th, 2012, stood at the top of Mount Vincent, and job done, all done. Come home and actually I went back to France. I stayed in France another 6 months, and then moved back to the UK in 2013.
Mm.
And only ever climbed once after that. I decided I wanted to. I was going on holiday to New Zealand and decided that if I was going on holiday, I want to do Mount Cook because I'd heard about Mount Cook, although not high, was quite a tough climb. So I did that, I think, in 2017, and that was the last serious climb I ever did. Apart from every now and again, I go back to the Alps and do a bit of skiing and climb with a few mates, but that's few and far between now. Uh, you know, I've done it. I mean, when I often meet up with the Scotsman and the Irishman for a few beers, as we do every couple of years, we all get drunk and talk about going back and doing the North Face of Everest. But I don't think we ever will. You know, I consider myself very privileged and lucky to have done it and survived it. And I've got 4 kids, 12 grandkids now. I'm not going to put them through that again. I don't think. You know, I think it's time. Although I've still got all my climbing kit, it's in the shed at the bottom of the garden. Never get rid of that. So there we are.
Wow. That is absolutely exceptional on so many levels. I mean, there's so many things. First of all, describing reaching the summit of Everest, reaching the summits of several of them. Thank you for attempting to put that into words, because I've heard from a lot of people who, well, any type of massive feat, whether it's something in the Olympics, whether it's a world title, whatever, usually they can't put it into words, but they try. So thank you for trying. Also, you mentioned as well about your family, and I had that in the back of my mind to just to mention briefly here, because obviously, everything you've achieved, it sounds very glamorous. It is an incredible achievement, but it's not glamorous. It's quite dangerous from a certain perspective. So, with regards to your children and everything, if you don't mind me asking, were they concerned for your safety, your friends, you know, the people close to you, even people you were in business with? Because although you're taking calculated risks and you're preparing the right way and you're setting things up the right way, it is still one of the most dangerous things people can do on this earth. And obviously, people do unfortunately pass away in these attempts, to the best of my knowledge. Well, fairly frequently by the sound of it. I mean, I'm not sure statistically, but with regards to people's response, first of all, from the concern side, but also possibly from the side of when you did actually complete all of the summits, we'll talk about people's response to that. But first, if you don't mind me asking about it, what was the response from your family?
I think I'm quite fortunate. I've got 4 sons, and I think because of their attitude, and one of them was a pro boxer. He trains Paul now, so they've always been go-getters, always good footballers, and done lots of things. 2 of them have been boxers, and they've all been quite high. So I think they got that was me. You know, that was if I, you know, that was that I was gonna do it, and I think they were quite comforted the fact that I made sure I was competent and did all of the background training and learning to make sure. You know, I don't think we ever sat down and talked about the if buts and maybes of it, and I think that's something that you don't really want to have those conversations, because although you know they worry, you don't want it really to start to get in your head that it's not, it's a very selfish thing. Climbing, mountaineering, certainly climbing, that's selfish. To just decide that 1 in 20, or is it 10% of people that go up there die? I mean, that's a selfish thing to do if you've got family. However, if you've minimized the risks and you are open and that it's something that you just have to do, then I think if you've got a good family support and good friends around you, then you get more support than you do get concerns, and I think that's very important. Very important. I've got a younger sister. My mum died very young, so I've got my younger sister is like my mum, but she was the only one that at any point used to say to me, "Will you please stop doing this? Will you please?" And I said, "I'll just do one more, just do one more. When I've done that one, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop." But then she used to say that when I used to ride like motorbikes at nearly 200 miles an hour, or anything, So that's her way of showing how much she loves me and worries. But from a support point of view, I had so much support that it was an affirmation of my mindset to keep doing it and be confident about doing it. And I think you have to have that.
Absolutely. Well, that feeds back into what you were saying earlier about not saying, well, maybe I'll do this or whatever, but saying I absolutely will reach the top or reach the finish line or what have you, which you mentioned earlier. So I can understand that. I mean, thinking about the positives and blanking out those other things, but it bears mentioning. It certainly does. And the slogan that you use, Mark, your attitude determines your altitude as well. Wonderful illustration of the mindset aspect. When did you first start using that, and where did you first come across it?
I don't know. I assume it's been used before, but I don't remember picking it from anywhere other than when I first came back to the UK and got asked to start doing motivational speaking. Two of my sons and two friends, I started coming up with the story about, and I got asked to do it to simulate building businesses with climbing mountains. So I started to look at the elements needed. And if I'm going to try and remember now, because I haven't done anything for about 7 or 8 years. So the first thing is about, or one of the things is about the team around you, the people around you. So it's teamwork. The second one will be about the plan. Have you got the right? Is the plan right? So if I'm going to climb Everest, what's the plan to get to Everest? The third one will be about your competency. Have you done the right amount of training? Have you learned the right things? In business, you need to learn how to read a spreadsheet or statutory accounts, or know how to deal with HR. On a mountain, you need to know how to tie a carabiner, put crampons on, abseil down the side, all these things. So there are simulations in all of those. But the one key thing, the fourth thing that I got to was it's about belief. And it comes back again to the thing I said was about believing that you're going to start a business and be successful, and you're going to start at the bottom of a mountain and get to the top and back down again. So the real gel is belief. You can have all those other three elements, but if you don't really believe, then it ain't going to happen. And it must have been in one of these afternoons that we were brainstorming that I really can't remember where it came from. But it was about the attitude started it. It's about your attitude. It really has to be attitude. And then with the mountains, altitude. So it just resonated. Your attitude determines your altitude. If you want to climb Everest, you've got to have the right attitude. If you want to get to the highest altitude you can physically walk in the world, you've got to have the right attitude. And that's where it came from. Whether it's been used before or since, I never trademarked it. So someone else is welcome to it.
Well, absolutely, but it's as I mentioned, it's a wonderful illustration, really condensed into one phrase there about so many things contained within that.
Yeah.
I've heard it used with an old school motivational speaker called Zig Ziglar as the title of one of his books, but that's the only other place I've ever heard of it. So the fact that you're using it, I think is wonderful, because it really does illustrate so many things. Now, I'm mindful of your time and everything, so I won't keep you here all day, but I'd like to give a little mention to a couple of other ventures of yours, with that being your businesses and your motivational speaking. Now, particularly with the motivational speaking side of things, you mentioned to me when we spoke on the phone that you did that for a while, and words to the effect, you got tired of speaking about yourself. Now, with regards to the recognition that you receive, rightfully so, from everything you've achieved, obviously that's not the reason why you did any of it, but in terms of how you feel about motivational speaking and things as that topic, is it something that you think you'll ever do in the future, or is it something that you've really sort of done for a while and sort of left on the back burner for the time being?
I did it for a fair few years, and I did enjoy it. And I think what I should have done, if I would, I did it for a while, and you get good money from doing it, and it's enjoyable. But I think I never changed the format. which I probably should have done. I changed it. I used to. I never charged for schools. I used to get asked to do a lot of school kids. I think it's year 6 or 7. They often do stuff about the world mountains, and there was I got asked to do quite a lot. So I changed it slightly for that. But I think if I probably because I heard it so much, I felt it became quite boring. Probably because I heard it so much. Now, what you remember is the audience have only heard it for the first time. So I suppose from their point of view, it is still interesting. I just needed to change it to make it interesting for myself, really. And I stopped doing it seriously a fair few years ago now. I did some schools a couple of years ago. I haven't really done anything on it since. If I was going to do it again, if there was a need for people to hear my story again, I would spend a couple of months changing it around and maybe thinking about. I've still got the format. I've still got the stories, because I tell little stories. The things I'm like the guy, getting held up with machetes in Indonesia, different things, falling down a crevasse in a lap. So there's different stories that you can put in. So and that's what people want to hear. And wrongly or rightly, people like to hear how dangerous it is, which is fine. But I've been on mountains when people have died, so that danger is real to me. If you want to watch something, go and watch a film on people that dying. I don't want to talk about it. Those people gave their lives for something they were passionate about, and I was lucky. I walked up and walked down. So I suppose back to your, without getting too serious, back to your point is I would do it again, but I'd have to seriously think about the content and the way I did it and the way I presented it.
Absolutely. Well, it's one of those things, Mark, where, in a sense, I hope that you do continue to get your message out there in some form. Now, obviously, it's your decision, it's your life. I'm just saying that personally, there's so much value in what you share for life. And as you say, separating the entertainment aspect of you, if you like, which is, yes,
Yeah.
it's very entertaining to hear your story. Yes, it is. But obviously, when you say about people losing their lives, they have families and things, and that sort of crosses into a sort of disrespectful territory. It could do, if people are asking that. So, but if we sort of separate the entertainment, obviously it needs the entertainment a little bit, but and just look at the value of what you offer for, hope, inspiration, upliftment, people pushing past their perceived limits, etc. My personal opinion is, only my humble opinion, you might not agree, is that the world does need that in some form, even if it was in a book form, which we'll touch on as one of the last things before we wrap this up. But either way, that's up to you. But there is a lot of value in what you share, and I can imagine talking about yourself would get dull in a sense. I mean, if roles were ever reversed and I was talking about myself on these and not asking the questions, it would get boring. But from the people listening to it, it's incredibly profound. So moving into the last couple of things. Well, I say the last couple, but the last handful of topics. You mentioned about, or you're well known also for being very successful in business as well. And I'd like to give a quick mention to your business journey, just a little bit, if that's okay, because again, like with the marathons and like with the mountaineering and everything that we've talked about, I could happily do an interview on every topic. So trying to pack it all in is a challenge, is my fun challenge, from my side. But to give a little mention to your business from the point of view that you've applied some of the lessons, as I mentioned, that you've learned in life and in sport to business and vice versa, by the sound of it, really looking at it from that point of view, more than the nitty gritty. Let's start with that connection in terms of how the connection forms between the lessons you've learned, say, on the mountain or running the marathons, how they apply to business, how maybe some of the lessons you've learned to business apply back to the sports, if you get where I'm coming from with this.
No, I get it completely, and it's interesting because really over the last few years I've been doing, whereas before I started businesses or bought into businesses and built them up and either sold them on or just whatever I did. Over the last sort of 6 or 7 years, I've been in what we call the turnaround world, where I've been asked by banks or high net worth individuals that have got businesses that are what we call, again, distressed, so that they need, you know, they're in trouble. So, and I applied it as a similar thing, and I've done it with 5 or 6 businesses over the last 7, 8 years, where you look at the business and say, right, you know, there's how do we make it survive? What do we need to do? And there are some, like you do on a mountain, there are going to be some tough decisions you've got to make. But if you've got 150 people, and if you can restructure and save the jobs of 120 people and build a business so that in a given time there might be another 30, 40 jobs that come in, then that's how I look at it. And recently, literally last week, I started helping a couple of guys that have got a really, really good businesses in the UK at the moment, because of the last few years with the pandemic and Brexit, are struggling, and there's no getting away from that. So what you have to do is look at it from an angle that says there is nothing that is a challenge to you that hasn't been seen before. All we've got to do is find the best solution for you and your business and your staff and your customers going forward. And that just means trying different things, you know, trying a different route. It's like, you know, you go through the icefall on Everest, you don't go through the same route every time you go through the icefall, because it moves. Business moves, you know, the challenges of business move. No one expected when we came out of Brexit that freight costs around the world would go up 20, 30%. Now, you can imagine how many businesses didn't have that in their forecast, so they've got to adapt. And then how many businesses would think, well, actually they've shut the ports in America, so I've got all these goods sitting on the dock in the ports in America or in the Netherlands or wherever, that are not going to get to my customer. I've paid for them. What am I going to do with them? So it's it's about being resilient and not being so blinkered that you think that the way you're going is always the right way. Be open to a different route, and that's how I approach it now. And that's you know, I've never had a proper job. I've only ever been in business since I left school at 15. You know, that's all I've ever done. So that's an experience thing. It's not something that you, I suppose they can, I suppose if someone's doing a degree in business studies, it probably does touch on it, but it's never likely to be assimilated to how I do things, that's for sure. So that's it really. It's just being determined. You know, these 2 guys, they're great guys, are really, and it took 3 or 4 goes to get the solution, and by next Wednesday, Thursday, we will have that solution. And we will keep that business moving forward, and I'll go and have a beer with them. And it's been a 3-week journey, often like a mountain, of trying and looking and doing different things to get to succeed. Simple as that.
Yeah, well, it's amazing to explain that connection, to touch on that, get a little bit of business advice, life advice, and really, you know, to mention how you've lived your life on your own terms, really, not just with the mountaineering and the marathons and everything, but in general, which I think is a very, very special thing. Absolutely remarkable. So I think it's about an hour now we've been talking, so we'll wrap this up very, very soon, as I know you have things to do with your evening. Really, the last couple of things that I'd like to mention here are what I call the intangible topics. And by that, I mean, very broadly speaking, when we spoke on the phone, you know, you mentioned about, I think you mentioned in passing about pretty much being quite an obsessional person, quite a driven person and everything like that. And you mentioned in passing about the positive or negative aspects of that. I mean, it's bound to have pros and cons. I'd like to touch on that from the point of view of not sort of getting into anything that's too personal for you, as I never do that, but from the point of view about some of the things you've learned about yourself from some of the risks you've taken, some of the adventures you've had. Now, for the sake of that sounding like a very big question that could take up a whole other hour of its own, we'll have to narrow it down to sort of 1 or 2 things. But I'm looking at this from the point of view that you've taken say this obsessional quality, and you're using it in a positive way. You're living life on your own terms. You're doing things the right way. So I would like to just get your reflections on a little bit, maybe one or two things you've learned about yourself from climbing mountains, running marathons, being in business that you wouldn't have known when you started. Now, I know that's a really big topic, so I sort of apologize for that. But if we had to hone it down a little bit, it would be wonderful to touch on, please.
I can. I'll try to in a few minutes. I think it came about when I was 3 or 4 mountains in, and I always journal the mountains. I used to journal the running to a degree. Certainly the ultra multi-day ones I did. I started reading the journals, and again, someone suggested, why don't you write it as a book? And I started to look at that as what it could look like, and I couldn't work it out. I'm not a writer, but so I just sat down and I thought, well, the only way I'm going to get all this down, and maybe it'll be a legacy for my children and grandchildren, was to start at the beginning, how I grew up, which is, I'm not going to go into all that now, which was quite challenging, and how how I became the person I am out of that. And it became clear very early on, I can be quite obsessional. I'm quite OCD with cleaning and stuff. I can be quite obsessional with tidiness and clothes and things. But every obsession, like in anything in life, a positive will have a negative, and those. So I looked at these obsessions over the many years. I mean, and I'm talking many years. I'm 62 years old. I'm 63 this year. So there have been so many ups and so many downs, not just in climbing and that, but in my personal life, that I can only put down to the obsessiveness of once my mind starts, it becomes a runaway train. Sometimes I think there's a good way of doing it. So the only way I can not do the bad obsessive stuff, if you like, is to have good obsessive stuff going on. So that's fine when you've got mountains to climb and running to climb, but when you've got not a lot to do and you can no longer do those things, you've got to find other things to do it. I'm fortunate. My son's ex-pro boxer. We've got our own gym, literally a 5-minute walk from my house. I'm in there every day. That, to other people say that's a bit obsessional. Well, I need to. I've got a turbo trainer bike. So I think because I've managed to stay so fit for so long, I have to keep doing that to stop me going in other directions, I think, is the way to do it. And business, and focus on business and do more. I get bored very easily. So I eventually wrote all this down up to 2013. It's just a lot of ramblings, bad spelling, bad grammar. I got I got a few pages and couldn't be bothered to keep correcting. And even on autocorrect, I just rambled. And it's something like 150, 200,000 words that has sat in. I printed it out and it's sat in my safe in one of my rooms, and it's never seen the light of day since 2013. One day I may get it out and try and make some sense of it, and journalize it for my children. Will it be a book? I don't know. Maybe someone who knows a story, and there's some funny ones in there, some not so funny. There's some I probably wouldn't want people to read. Certainly not while I was alive. So I don't know. I think I need to find that person who will take it away and come back with it for me. So yeah, that. But I think you've interviewed a lot of people, and I've met a lot of driven people. Most of them have got that trait to some degree, without a shadow of a doubt. And where that comes from, that's the nature or nurture question. Where does that come from?
Well, I don't think either of us can have a definitive answer to that, but from experience, I can say it is a very common personality trait. It is a very common type of thinking pattern, I would say. And I'm similar to that in a different way. Hence, I've done so many interviews and photographed so many famous people and done all sorts of things. And even with this interview, we're saying, right, I want to interview someone who's made it to the top of Everest. Where do I start? I start putting the call out, right? Does anyone know anyone, etc. But I can't leave it alone until I've given that a real push. So I get where you're coming from. I do think that a lot of people who achieve great things actually have trauma. They have negative, what could be regarded as negative starts in life, certainly. And they seem to use that in a positive and a constructive way. And to a certain degree, those sorts of people, and they'll always have demons, but at the same time, it's as I mentioned way earlier on in the beginning, from a different perspective, people achieve great things like what you've achieved, climbing mountains, but you still have to push through pain, you still probably get nervous, you still have to extensively prepare all of the things that everyone else would have in that sense, but all about how you use it. Do I back down from it? Do I push through it? Do I find a way to use that emotion to my advantage? All of these types of things. And from experience, whether there's an innate gene or something more biological that causes that, I'm not sure, but I certainly have seen people using trauma and to some extent emotional pain in a lot of cases in a constructive manner.
Mm.
Um, so what causes that is, well, it's too big a question for either of us. We'll leave that to the scientists,
Agreed.
psychologists. But it is a very, very profound point. And with these last questions, I did have some of these things you've learned from overcoming various things and everything. And I think we've covered that. So the last thing that I'd like to ask you, the very last question is just to distill from a final point, anybody who has a big dream, a big goal they want to achieve. We've touched on a lot of topics. Your attitude determines your altitude, and so many things, and the pain barriers and mindset and everything like that. But especially when we factor in your business accolades as well from such a young age. Somebody has a new goal, they want to get started. What would be one or two pieces of advice you'd give to those people? And after that, we'll wrap this up. But that's my last question for you, Mark.
I think it can be. I use a phrase that's a slight adaptation to one that a lot of people use, which is anything is achievable. Well, actually, I'd like to take that to everything is achievable. I left school at 15. I've been a very successful businessman. I've never. I climbed Everest before I climbed Snowdon. Come on, if I can do it, anyone can do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Powerful. Yeah, absolutely very powerful, and it sounds simple. As we know, the application is a different story, but
It's in your head.
mm,
There's another one that we're only limited by our own imagination. That is so true. If you and your reference to Henry Ford, there's some that say they will and some that say they won't, and they're both correct, or whatever version you hear of that. These are all reality. They're reality. They're not just sayings. That's reality. You've got to take that and go with it if you want to be successful. If you want to do something, if you want to be happy. If you want to be happy, do what you want to do. If you want to be happy, very simple.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's been incredible, Mark. I mean, I knew it would be incredible speaking with you, but it certainly has been absolutely remarkable. Personally, for myself, a dream come true to interview you and to speak with you. But also for everyone listening to this, some very valuable life lessons, some very valuable tips and techniques that they can put into any life area. And really, Mark, that is something I'm immensely grateful to you for being an open book, if you like. And I know that you're used to dealing with people in business and you're used to public speaking. You're used to putting this sort of thing out there. But at the same time, I still appreciate that. And I say this to people, no matter how many interviews I do, because we are taking facets of your life, facets of what make you who you are really, and putting them out there in a sort of public space and for public discourse and everything. So I appreciate that a great deal. So last thing for me to do is just to say thank you for your time, really.
No, thank you, Liam. I've really enjoyed it. I really have. I was nervous about doing it because I haven't done anything like this for a long time, but I'm so glad I did. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.